What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Quality Talk Bite Size. I'm Stu Day. Another quick one today. Another bite size episode. We're knocking these out pretty quickly now. Not much shorter content, much more to the point conversations and discussion points and stuff like that. And in this episode, I want to talk to you about storytelling and the more importantly, the art of being able to construct stories to really bring quality to life for those individuals in your teams with leadership and so on. I was due to give a talk at the Lambda Test New conference a couple of weeks ago, but unfortunately I wasn't feeling too good, so I had to withdraw. But this was the topic I was going to talk about, so I felt like I'd do the podcast episode to still share my thoughts around storytelling and some ideas and some tips on how I use storytelling on a day-to-day basis to bring quality to life. So I feel as though it's really important, and it's something that maybe we need to use more. And this came up in a conversation I was having with Rosie Sherry the other day, and we were talking about some of the challenges we have about when we're trying to bring people on the journey from a quality perspective, help them understand what it is that they need to do, where their role is important, what the sort of contributions they need to make, the skills they need to have. And Rosie asked me a really interesting question as to why do I think that people understanding what it is that we're trying to share and get across to them can't always or doesn't always land in the most effective way. And I honestly think it's because often we're just too direct. We just come out and say what it is that we're thinking. We say what it is that we expect people to do, but maybe we don't make it as relatable as potentially we could. And as adults, as if anybody out there that's listening or watching has got children, storytelling is a massive part of growing up, right? So childhood. I used to love stories when I was a kid, but often it wasn't so much about the story, but more importantly how it was read. The enthusiasm, the passion, the expressiveness of what was being said. And two people could potentially read the same story to me, but I maybe would enjoy it more with one person reading it to me than another. And I think that's where we need to be finding different ways to really communicate and share our thoughts and ideas with people and bring them to life more through storytelling. But obviously, we need to be able to make things relatable as well. And to be able to make things relatable, we need to obviously have empathy for others, understand, more deeply where others are coming from, what their backgrounds are, build relationships to really connect and make those stories that we are using more valuable and more relatable. And there's different ways that we can do it. It's not just about once upon a time there was blah 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 blah. No, we can often we'll still try and sit within our world of tech. And actually, often it's better to step outside of tech and trying to bring things to be more relatable. So, I often liken our role within the quality space, as to being a parent of, educating people, educating children, helping them understand the why behind things, and anybody that's got kids will know that, the why question comes up a lot, right? It's something that definitely can be challenging when your child is very inquisitive, very curious, and sometimes just being difficult as well, right? If you're asking them to do something and the immediate response is why do I need to do that? It can become quite frustrating. But it's very similar to what we have to face on a day-to-day basis, right? We're trying to help people understand why quality is important, how they contribute, why we need to invest a certain amount of money, why we need to give time to people, why we need to build community, So we need to make it more relatable and understood. So what I'll try and do is I'll try and take people outside of their day to day, and maybe if I know that somebody is really interested in sport or a certain type of sport, I'll maybe try and utilize that as an analogy and sort of use that as a way of storytelling. And if I know somebody's a parent, again, I'm a parent, right? So I've got a lot of experience from being a parent. I'll utilize that and maybe try and connect with that person in that way and utilize that method of storytelling as well. But if you're doing it in like large groups and things like that, obviously you can't connect with everybody in the same way, and it can be very difficult to make things relatable. But a great way to do it is to utilize some sort of visualization. So I've done this in a number of different ways. So, for example, helping people understand the nuances of quality and how there are layers to it. It isn't just the end product that you see. It's contextual. It's dependent on many different things. It's subjective, etc. And one way I've done this is I've basically done a really simple storytelling exercise where I've printed, say, 6 to 8, it doesn't have to be that number, different photographs of different types of houses. And these houses range from, the beautiful big, mansion, swimming pool, all this stuff, to maybe a small wooden shack, or even, a house that's made of straw or something like that. That's the opposite end of the spectrum. And then different things in between, maybe some obscure architecture, maybe some larger property, like larger houses, but maybe they don't look aesthetically pleasing, all this kind of stuff. And basically just put those images, put those pictures in place in front of people. And then we start talking about, okay, so based on what you're seeing here, what you're observing, what do you feel would be the highest quality house, right? And what that then drives is it drives a really great conversation of, getting into a story around, so if somebody chooses the mansion, why is that? Why is the mansion do you think the mansion is the highest quality? And it might be because it looks really well made, etc., etc. And then I maybe might sort of challenge that thinking, or not challenge it, but provide a little bit more context. So maybe I'll then say, well, what if I was to say to you that property actually has only been finished on the outside? Internally, it doesn't have many, it doesn't have any flooring, it doesn't have any electrics, it doesn't have any kitchen fitted or anything like that. How does that change your perception of the quality of the house? And of course, then that drives a different conversation. But then if you look at the properties that are maybe built of wood, they look like shacks essentially, but it's all context, right? And they're built in that way because potentially that is the only materials that are available to the people that are building those houses. Or maybe they're built in that way because they live in an area where they might have to rebuild their houses on a regular basis due to natural disasters. Maybe they get hit by flooding. Maybe they live in a God forbid, they live in a part of the world where violence and war happens. And the only way that they can continue to put a roof over their head is to build these types of houses that serve their purpose but are easily to rebuild should they need to. Again, and then we can kind of get into those conversations around context and why why just looking at something on the outside isn't always aesthetically isn't always the highest quality. And another example there is that when people, if people were to pick the nice, aesthetically pleasing mansion, I can then talk to them about, well, what you're not seeing is you're not seeing the fact that property, that house has been built on 2 layers of bricks as a foundation. On the outside it looks really lovely, but the foundations that are holding it up are really shaky, are really minimal. And if you then relate that back to the products that we build from a software perspective, and you think of the foundations as code, you think of what people can see as the end product, i.e. what the customer ends up getting. But those foundational pieces are the code and the infrastructure and the underlying technology that we've put in place, and that's actually quite flaky and unstable. It becomes really hard to maintain. So if I needed to then improve the foundations of that house, that's going to be really difficult. Do I have to tear the house down to build better foundations? Do I need to start again? Is there a way that I can, somehow solidify temporarily those foundations to, allow the house to stand and not subside? I'll get my words right in a minute. In the coming years, that kind of thing. And it's the same thing with our code, right? So how do we maintain that code? And are we building things for maintainability in the future, or are we building things right now to get a product out the door so that customers, are able to use it, and we're providing some sort of value quickly and feedback quickly, but knowing that actually longer term we're going to have a problem. So it's a great way of really sort of bringing things to life and using storytelling and metaphors, analogies, that kind of thing to help people understand, what the bigger picture of quality means. And you can use houses, you can use cars, you can use anything you like, really. But then another great way to help people understand and bring quality to life is using Lego. And everybody seems to really enjoy just using Lego, right? They just seem to enjoy getting their hands on pieces of Lego and starting to build things. And I use Lego in a number of different ways. And I've used Lego in recent workshops that I've done when I was at Capital One, but also a Ministry of Testing event in Coventry several months back to bring quality to life. So I asked people to have a discussion on their tables, think about what does quality mean to them, not just in the workspace, but also in their everyday life. How do they know if something is of the level of quality that they need, a high quality or the right level of quality? And then I asked them to build something that they can then use to hold up and talk about and use as a vehicle to share what it is that quality means to them and how they would describe it. And I find this works really well. I mean, I give them the option to build as a team, as you would do from a software perspective, right? We build as teams, or to do it on an individual basis. It doesn't really matter. If you can come to a consensus as a team, that's amazing, because ultimately that's what you want to do on a day-to-day basis. But the art of doing that, and the art of then giving them time to sort of take those thoughts, take those words that they've written down, and turn it into something visual that they're building to then share and represent, is a really great way of telling the story of what quality is. And I'm not actually the one that's telling the story. I'm the one that's giving them the space to create the story, to create the narrative, to then share back to the wider group. So they're the ones that are actually sharing their stories and why they've chosen what they've chosen and why they've built what they've built. And you'd be amazed at some of the things that people built. I've utilized Lego in leadership workshops as well. And again, build something that represents great leadership. I mean, you think, well, that's pretty difficult, right? How can we build something that represents great leadership? But people do it. People actually create something, and then they'll be able to hold that thing up and use that as a mechanism, as a vehicle to share what it is they're trying to say. And you can do that as an individual. So you can utilize objects, you can utilize Lego in a great way. So you can build something to help others understand what quality is. And it's not just quality, you can use it for other things as well. But the art of storytelling is really, really powerful. So when we're trying to coach our teams, whether that be you're in a position where you're in a team, or whether you're somebody within a leadership role and you're trying to help other people understand, the broader nature, the holistic view of quality, let's say, you can utilize this technique, these different approaches to storytelling, to help people understand and make things more relatable. If you have listened to or watched the recent episode that I did around bonus driven development, I referenced the NFL, so the American football, and I told a story around how they work in a way that they talk about doing this 1-11 approach, i.e. you're one person in a team of 11 and you need to contribute in your way to supplement the rest of the team. And if everybody does their 1-11, comes together, then all the pieces work beautifully and so on. And that's another way that you can use storytelling. But obviously, as I say, taking people outside of the tech world, so to speak, their everyday environment, and having conversations that are slightly different, slightly off tangent, that kind of thing, can make a big difference. And actually, it ultimately just makes it more fun as well. So for me, being able to think outside the box a little bit, take time to get creative, build relationships with people to understand who they are as individuals, and so on and so on. So if you're doing this on a one-to-one perspective, as a coach, you can get a better understanding of the person that you're coaching. Then you can kind of create these stories that are ultimately relatable to them. If somebody's really into their cars, how can you come up with a car analogy, a story that really sort of excites them and helps them to think in a slightly different way? Another great sort of example of this is Formula One, and how the pit crews come together, and they're able to bring a car in pit stop within minimal seconds, and it gets out the door. And that's because they all know exactly what they need to do to contribute to what they are trying to achieve, which is obviously speed, but obviously the highest quality that they can achieve in that as well, right? So if they know that there's a problem, speed doesn't matter. If they're not going to send that driver out back on the track, if they realize there's a problem, just so that they can hit a whatever seconds for a fast pit stop, no, they're not going to do that. So how can you make that relatable to what we do with software? We all strive for speed all the time. We're always striving for speed. We're always trying to release as much new software and new ideas and new products and so on as possible. But how do we do that in a way that isn't gonna, put our customers at risk? Think about Formula One. The customer at that point is the driver. How can they, as a pit crew, do things in the fastest possible time, but as safely as possible, to not put their customer, who is the driver, at any sort of risk? And we all know within Formula One, risk is life and death, right? we don't live with that necessarily on a day-to-day basis. I mean, depending on the nature of the industry you work in, maybe, there it could be life and death. If you work in pharmaceuticals, if you work in aviation, one error, one mishap, one defect, in software or a product can potentially, cause somebody to lose their life. And that's the reality of what some of you will face into, and that's a very challenging place to be. So how do you make sure that things are balanced correctly and stuff like that? And that's the other thing we have to remember, that it's whether you're talking and trying to coach within your organization, or you're somebody like me right now. I'm talking to the much wider world out there of, and I've got to be mindful that not everybody's, in the same situation. Not everybody works in the same industry. Not everybody has the same associated risks. Some have much higher risks than others. So I can't just be thinking about, do it this way and, the world would be great. No, it doesn't work like that. Right. So we see all this stuff being thrown around on LinkedIn and, all these sweeping comments, all this gaslighting, all this. I don't have time for it, to be honest. It's a bit boring if you ask me. But ultimately, what it's not doing is it's not driving any context. A lot of the posts that go out don't have any context. And I'm not going to assume that they're AI written. I'm not going to do that. But if you're putting a post out and it's to talk about, what people should do or what they shouldn't do, etc., give examples, give context, tell a story. How is that relatable to people? Right? It helps then people understand. It helps then people challenge, rather than people just challenging for the sake of challenging because you've come at me with a non-contextual sweeping statement, so I'm going to go back to you with a non-contextual sweeping answer. It gets boring. And we talk about we still talk about automation versus manual testing and this kind of stuff. Do you know what? I don't care. Honestly, I'm beyond it. Tell me a story as to why automation and within your industry, within your team, within your organization, automation is more important and more valuable than manual testing, and then we can have a proper discussion. All right, and that's what's really important. It's our ability to create the view and set the scene so that we can have a proper discussion. So using storytelling is a really powerful way of helping us achieve that. And we're very good at being very telly. We've always been very good at being very telly as quality professionals. Oh, you shouldn't do this and you should do that and you need to do that and da da da. But if somebody comes and tells us that we should be doing certain things, I often see people getting very defensive or asking why. But then when people ask us why, we get a little bit defensive. So it is funny. It is. I have to laugh because I've been there. I'm not saying I'm perfect in no way, shape, or form. I'm absolutely not. I've been there. But my mind has opened up a hell of a lot more over more recent years. I say recent, probably the last 10 years or so. To having more empathy with people, to understanding that, it isn't a this or that thing. It isn't black and white. There's a very grey area when it comes to everything that we're trying to do. And, there's a balance that we have to strike. And, yes, you can compromise on quality. You just need to understand what your risks are and you need to be able to tell the story about that. And so, we need to be better storytellers, right? And it's something that we should practice more. And, we should maybe train more on. I mean, I know that there are some training courses out there that are around storytelling and stuff like that, and they'll be generic. They won't specifically be towards what we're trying to do from a quality perspective. But like most training, that we receive, we can apply it in so many different ways, and we can make sure that excuse me, that we make it relatable. We take all the good stuff that we know that will be powerful for us and valuable to us, and we apply it to our roles as quality coaches, quality engineers, leaders, whatever that looks like. So, yeah, I just wanted to talk about it, really. I wanted to share my views. I wanted to share some examples of what you can do, and but I would love to hear more about what you do from a storytelling perspective. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that utilize storytelling in many different ways. So please do share and drop your thoughts and comments in the chat. And yeah, I'd be really keen to kind of get some more ideas, really, because I personally I love doing it. I love coming up with creative ideas as to how we can do that. The other great way of doing things is to using games. So over time, I've used different types of games. So building cup pyramids, you may have seen it on my LinkedIn and stuff like that. But getting teams to work together, like they would as or like they should I say, as a software delivery team, working together collaboratively, each of them doing their own part, but doing it so it connects. I've got a great game that Cup Pyramid, which is it's called, that we did at Test Bash last year when on the sponsors booth. I know a lot of people came over and had great fun with that. But then there's also another game, if you like, that I use with the big tracks. So if you're an 80s and 90s child like I am, you'll have heard of big tracks and you'll absolutely love them. If you're maybe later in life, much younger than me, you may not have heard of what big tracks is. But big tracks is essentially a tank which is programmable, and you program it to go off in different directions. And ways in which I've used this before is to create a track, masking tape track on the floor. And again, you may have seen this on my LinkedIn. You may have been at Test Bash a few years ago when we did this. We had it at the sponsors booth. But you utilize it in a way that, from a critical thinking and exploratory testing perspective, because you don't give the instructions of how the thing works to anybody. They have to figure that out. And they have to experiment a little bit and try and figure out how it works. And then when they think they're ready, they then have 3 goes to try and get the big tracks around the track, and as close to the finishing box as possible. But there's other things that we throw in there, like we throw in different coloured post-it notes across the track, and there's different reasons behind each of the different coloured post-it notes. And the idea is that the group then should, in theory, ask some questions, be curious. Again, it's a great way of sort of helping people understand and telling a bit of a story around, well, this is how you should approach things day to day. Be curious, ask these questions, experiment a little bit, work together. Think about how you can use exploratory testing in your everyday delivery as a team and techniques. So there's lots of different ways you can do it, but if you're using storytelling, I'd love to hear more about it. If you're not using storytelling, then give it a go. Experiment with it, have fun with it, and you all know me by now. Fun is the key. Have fun with it, and yeah, just let me know how it goes. Hope you've enjoyed my thoughts around storytelling. As I say, I was due to give this talk at Lambda Test New conference, and unfortunately I wasn't feeling up to it. So I thought I'd share my views on the podcast instead for everybody, so people don't miss out. So that's it. Another bite-sized episode done and dusted. Hope you enjoy it, and hope you've enjoyed your summers as well as we step into autumn and we step back to kids being back at school and so on. Hope everybody feels recharged and is in a really good place as we sort of take on the final quarter of the year, so to speak. So yeah, look after yourselves, everybody, and join me next time on another episode of Quality Talks podcast. Take care for now.